Hi, Gigi. Come share an apple with me. I picked it fresh from Granny Smith's sinister tree. Don't mind my stories, you'll soon see. They're as dark and disturbing as they can be. Murmurs of secrets, bloody sodden crimes, Granny's bone-clicking tales will twist your mind. You'll be hanging on my words from the edge of your seats. Now how'd you like to go dig up some bodies with me? So go grab a shovel and gather around, 'cause 8 feet under is where they'll be found. This podcast contains detailed discussions of real-life crimes, which may include descriptions of violence, sensitive subject matter, and other potentially distressing content. Listener discretion is strongly advised. The material is intended for mature audiences only and may not be suitable for children or those who may find such topics triggering. Welcome back to 8 Feet Under with Granny Smith, where the tea is hot and the what? Stories are cold. I don't know why. Every time it gets me. I am sorry for how the audio has been sounding. I don't know what's going on with it. I thought it was the software I'm using, and normally they're pretty quick about resolving issues or responding, but this time they were as slow as a drunk snail running through mud. I don't know what is going on, but I don't know. I don't know if it's the software or I also think maybe it's because I need a new laptop and a new mic. The mic was my son's that he was using for gaming, and I have no idea how long he's had it. My laptop, oh, my poor laptop. I've had her for years, and she's been good to me, but now she's fucking glitching out, freezing up, like doing this ghost touching thing, and I may or may not have dropped the mic a few times, literally. So, I don't know. We'll see. Apologies for the sound or the quality or whatever the hell. Anyway, so today's story was actually another suggestion. This one came from my older brother, Jason. So shout out, Jason. Thank you for bringing it to my attention because I had never heard of this before. So good looking out, big broski. Warning though, names will be butchered in this episode. Okay? We've been through this before. If it's something you can't stand, exit stage left. I don't know what to tell you. All right, boys and girls. Today we are traveling to a shadowy, dark corner of Bitsevsky Park in Moscow. It's already starting. Where the homeless, the vulnerable, the lonely, and the forgotten were targeted and terrorized between 1992 and 2006 by a man who played a game with a chilling score. Not on paper, not in his mind, but on his chessboard. Now, his chessboard wasn't your typical wooden chessboard. His was specially made to keep score of lives taken. What was his goal? To mark off each life he took with the intentions of filling all 64 squares with his victims. So go grab those bedazzled shovels so we can dig 8 feet into the story of Alexander Pichushkin, the man known as the Bitsevsky Park Maniac. Welcome to the Chessboard Killings. Sources for today are a 2007 NBC News article, a 2025 Reuters article, and the rest are in the show notes. I probably butchered the fuck out of that article name too. Anyway, I know I'm butchering his last name, so I'm going to call him Alexander through the entire episode. Alexander was born on April 9th, 1974 in Mytishki? No lie. Do not know how to say that. Mytishchi? Don't know. Anyways, it's a suburb outside of Moscow. He grew up on 2 Kherasonskaya Street. You guys try to pronounce it. Kherasonskaya. Try to pronounce it and tell me how the fuck to say it, because I know I'm butchering the shit out of that. Anyway, when he was still a toddler, his father left, and then later on, Alexander and his mom, Natalia Pichushkin, moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Moscow on Kronshald Boulevard. Something like that. With Alexander's younger half-sister, her husband, and their son. Their apartment was on the 5th floor, and it was a 6-minute walk from Bitsa Park. Bitsa, something like that. Anyway, friends from those earlier years said that Alexander was bright and sociable, but yet quiet at times. That changed, though, after one single moment. A childhood accident that would echo throughout the rest of his life. When Alexander was 4, he fell backwards off a swing. The seat struck his forehead with full force. Pop quiz, boys and girls. Didn't I talk about this shit before? Didn't I talk about head injuries in a previous episode? What do we see over and over again after someone injures their head? I have faith that you guys got that answer right. So anyway, doctors later said the injury damaged his frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that controls decision-making, emotions, and impulse. Experts say that this type of damage is more severe in children since the child's forehead only provides a fraction of the protection of the brain compared to an adult's forehead. So after the fall, everything shifted. Alexander's temper was short and his behavior was extremely unpredictable. See, I wasn't just talking to talk. I wasn't just making shit up in that episode, so feel free to call me Brain Doctor Sass, okay? Because those are my initials, SAS. So if I ever became a doctor, that would be my name, Dr. Sass. Moving on. Other kids mocked and bullied Alexander, calling him, quote unquote, that retard. So he started lashing out. Eventually, his mother had to transfer him to this special education school, hoping that him being in smaller classes may help, but instead, it only deepened his sense of being different. He became isolated and angry, and that is a dangerous combo. There was, however, one person who saw potential in him, which was his maternal grandfather. So his grandfather stepped in when no one else could get through to Alexander because he noticed that Alexander was extremely intelligent, but his talents and brains were not being put to use. He wasn't involved in any activities, and the school that his mom put him in only seemed to be focused on his disabilities, and they didn't promote working on any achievements. So good old grandpa taught him structure, focus, patience, and how to play chess. So Alexander winds up moving in with his grandfather, who encouraged him to explore intellectual hobbies, and it turns out none captivated him more than chess. So grandpa taught him the game, and once his talent became clear, Alexander was brought to Bitsevsky Park to play exhibition matches against older, more seasoned players. So they'd sit in the park for hours with the board balanced on this old rickety table, and his grandpa noticed that playing chess seemed to quiet Alexander's temper. He learned to think ahead and how to win using logic instead of rage. Chess eventually became this outlet for pent-up anger for Alexander. It was a place where he could dominate and feel in control. But outside of the chessboard life, things were pretty harsh for him still. He was still being bullied in school, and then his grandfather passed away while he was still a teenager, and that hit him really fucking hard. After his grandpa died, Alexander had no choice but to move back in with his mother, where he eventually re-enrolled in that school, special school. But by this time, he carried a growing belief that life itself was kind of a chessboard. People were the pieces, moves had consequences, and he was the only one who made all the rules. As a teenager, Alexander began drinking heavily to cope with the death of his grandfather, and then he started to show these random flashes of cruelty and violence. He would go around recording himself threatening classmates and bragging about how he wanted to harm others. Once he even held a child upside down by the leg and said, quote, "You are in my power now. I'm going to drop you from the window and you will fall 15 meters to your death." End quote. After he finished school, he did attend a technical college for a short period of time, but he didn't stick with it. So this guy, to reassure himself of his power, Alexander would rewatch those videos he made of himself threatening others over and over and over again. But eventually, that wasn't enough to satisfy his needs. By July 27th, 1992, when Alexander was 18, he committed his first known murder. He had invited his friend Mikhail Odachuk to meet him at Bitsevsky Park, where the two had agreed to come up with a plan to kill 64 people. When they got to the park, Mikhail changed his mind and said he didn't actually want to kill anyone. This made Alexander feel teased and betrayed. So what did he do? He strangled Mikhail and then threw his body in a sewer entrance to the park and then went back home as if nothing fucking happened. While the police were investigating Mikhail's disappearance, witnesses say that he was last seen with Alexander walking towards the park. Police wind up arresting Alexander at his mother's house on July 30th, 1992. When he was questioned about his whereabouts the day Mikhail went missing, Alexander did admit to being with him, but he claims when he left the park, Mikhail was alive and well. And since there was no other evidence, police had no choice but to release Alexander. The police called it an accident. No one ever looked into it any further, and Mikhail's body was never found. Alexander slipped quietly back into the community with his first killing going unpunished. But being arrested and questioned seemed to put a pause on his little chessboard killing plan. So years go by. Then in 2001, Alexander begins again. This time, not as an impulsive teenager, but as a man with a method and a mission. He chose his hunting ground carefully. He decided on none other than Bitsevsky Park. which was on the southern edge of Moscow. This park was filled with dense trees and these winding trails, and it's noted that this is a place where a person could scream and no one would hear it. Most of Alexander's victims were elderly men or acquaintances. Some were neighbors, and others were people he drank with near his apartment complex. Alexander would offer them vodka and invite them to the park to play chess, or he would lure them in by asking them to join him mourning his dead dog. Once they were deep into the trees, his tone changed. He would strike them on the head, usually with a hammer, and then to quote-unquote sign his victims, he'd push a vodka bottle or a stick into the wound. There was in Bitsa Park playing chess with a 52-year-old Yevgeny Pronin. After they finished their match, he told Pronin that it was the anniversary of his dog's death and asked him to walk to this specific spot where the dog was supposedly buried. So Pronin agrees and followed him deep into this secluded area of the park. Once they got there, Alexander took out a bottle of vodka and suggested that they share a drink. After toasting to the supposedly dead dog, Alexander suddenly hit Pronin in the head with the bottle. When Pronin died from the blow, Alexander disposed of the body by dropping it into a nearby well. Now we fast forward a little bit between late 2005 and his final killing in 2006, when Alexander changed his approach. He began attacking his victims from behind, repeatedly striking them in the head with a hammer, and then again forcing a bottle into the wound. He says this method helped him avoid getting blood on himself, but I don't really understand that because I feel like striking people over and over with a hammer would cause blood to get all over you, but I don't know. Many of the people he targeted actually lived in the same residential cluster on Kersonyaka Street. I butchered the shit out of that. Anyway, they lived in the same area as him. 10 victims came from the 4 neighboring buildings in his complex. Buildings 2, 4, 6, and 8. So police first thought the deaths of all these people in the park were either drunken accidents, robberies, or random acts of violence. And at the time, Russia was still being haunted by the memory of Andrei Chikatilo. Nope, that's wrong. Chikatilo. I don't know. Something like that. Anyways, he was also known as the Butcher of Rostov, and he had been caught just 1 decade earlier. So no one wanted to believe there was another fucking serial killer on the loose. And yes, Andrei Chikahua whatever is on my list of topics. So don't fucking look him up. His final victim was Marina Moskalyova, who was a supermarket cashier and one of his coworkers. Before meeting him that day, Marina left a note for her son. She wrote that she was going to take a walk with Sasha, which apparently was short for Alexander. When she didn't return home, her son went to the police. Security footage from the Kievsky metro station showed that Marina was walking beside Alexander just hours before her death. He was the last person to see her alive. 2 days later, on June 16, 2006, police arrested Alexander. After his arrest, in his apartment, investigators found the thing that gave him his nickname, a chessboard. It was hidden in a drawer, and most of the 64 squares were marked with dates or initials, one for each of his victims. He filled 61 squares before he was caught. When he was questioned, Alexander didn't deny it. Instead, he boasted about it. He said he'd killed over 60 people and that he wanted to complete the board. Alexander even criticized Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov, saying, quote, "He was a novice. I would have surpassed him," end quote. Police later confirmed 49 murders and 3 attempted murders, but Alexander insisted there were more. He said each victim was a quote-unquote move, and each life was another square. After his arrest, Alexander took investigators through Bitsa Park and walked them through many of his attacks, recalling each one with an unsettling clarity. Police filmed him as he reenacted the murders, step by step. He also admitted that not all of his killings followed his usual method of striking victims from behind. In several cases, he simply pushed victims into the park's sewer shafts, and some of those people were still alive when they were dumped into that sewer. Alexander's ambition was different from most killers. He wasn't driven by lust or revenge. He wanted a record. 64 kills for every square of a chessboard. His trial started in September of 2007 at the Moscow City Court, where crowds of people gathered. Journalists, victims' families, and onlookers were all drawn to this quote-unquote chessboard killer. During the trial, the prosecutors laid out their case, 49 counts of murder and 3 attempted murders, all taking place in Bitsa Park. Many of his victims' bodies were never found. Since the courtroom was filled with the families of his victims, Alexander was kept in this glass booth for his own protection, and by choice, he stood through the entire trial. He says he didn't deserve to sit before a court, as if he'd done nothing fucking wrong. He showed no remorse, he smiled, he corrected people, and he even joked throughout the trial. But on October 24th, 2007, the verdict came in. Alexander was found guilty of 49 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. This fucking guy actually asked the court to add an additional 11 victims to his body count to bring his total to 60 murdered and 3 surviving. He was sentenced to life in prison with the first 15 years in solitary confinement. When the judge asked Alexander if he understood his sentence, he replied, quote, "I'm not deaf," end quote. As the guards led him away, he turned to the court and said, quote, "I will never repent. I don't regret anything," end quote. Later challenged this sentence, arguing that it was quote-unquote too severe and requested it be lowered to 25 years in prison. I do have several quotes from an interview with him while he was in prison. They were translated to English, so keep that in mind if some of them don't quite sound right. We all know that other languages don't always translate smoothly, and it don't always, the math don't always math, so stick with me. Alexander later told police, quote, "I did it so they wouldn't just sleep, so they'd die," end quote. He seemed to love the power and control he felt in the moment of killing someone, and he said, quote, "For me, life without murder is like life without food," end quote. When he arrived in prison, Alexander said, quote, "When I was brought to prison, I was not in a good mood. Now it's gotten better. I've completely adapted. They have ideal water here. It's so hot, I even have to dilute it with cold water. For all the time that I have been here, my hair was cut only once. Do you know how much time they give me to take a shower? 5 whole minutes." Psychologists describe him as a psychopath with antisocial and narcissistic traits because he doesn't see himself as a monster, but instead sees himself as someone superior, someone who mastered a game that the rest of the world can't understand. All of his victims were inferior nobodies to him. When asked about his view on human life, Alexander stated, quote, "Human life is not long. It is cheaper than a sausage. My lawyer? I would cut him open like a fish. I would have killed him like an insect, and I would receive much pleasure from this process. I would cut him up and make belts out of his flesh. But as for remembering everyone I killed, who and when and where, that I don't remember. I don't even care to remember," end quote. Side note, though, the report says that when he walked them through the crime scene, he remembered everything. But now in this quote, he's saying that he doesn't. So I don't know which one's the truth. Either you remembered everything or you just don't care to remember. That math don't math. Anyway, deciding whether someone was going to live or die made him feel like he was a god. During his interview, he said, quote, "Each murder gave me pleasure. It made me feel like God," end quote. His motivation was all about control, to play, to dominate, and to complete that fucking chessboard. Forensic experts say that Alexander's crimes are different than most serial killers due to the lack of sexual motive and no financial gain. Instead, his sexual pleasure came from, quote unquote, skull fucking. Yeah, you heard me right. Skull fucking. That is the first time I've ever heard that. Anyway, Alexander says, "I like the sound of a skull splitting," end quote. Fucking weird. When asked about religion and politics, he said, quote, "I was baptized when I was 3 months old. The baptism took place, but I did not want it. Well, I do not think that someone is there. I can also say I will not either read the Bible or write an autobiography. I have never prayed to God, never will. This is a beautiful fairy tale for the weak, for those who sacrifice themselves to the state, Russian government. Men as they age increasingly dream that someone is there who is all-powerful. Well, what is it? As for voting, in all my 33 years, I have never missed a chance to vote," end quote. During the rest of his interview, Alexander was asked about dreams, literature, friendship, forgiveness, sports, and travel. So I'll read through his responses to those. When asked about dreams, he says, quote, "I have nightmares. A dog. It lived with me for a long time. She died. It was my fault. I treated it, how you say, not very... She could have been saved. It was a bad situation. It left something in my subconscious," end quote. Regarding literature, he says, quote, "Of course I don't write. Only Devki write. Journalists too, I suppose. And Devki, Devki, is Russian slang for girls. So according to him, only girls write and only journalists write. So whatever you say, pumpkin." Moving on. On friendship, he says, quote, First of all, what is a friend? This is not someone who gives you 100 rubles or lets you stay over for a night. And secondly, my principle, to the grave, and that's it. Yes, I received more pleasure from killing people whom I knew personally, but I also found a way to get to strangers, and that is not easy. Their relatives said they would never go with a stranger, but to me, they are flying, despite the difference in age. A youngster, Koryagin, who was one of his victims, I was leaving the police office, and I knew that everywhere was an ambush, but I remained free. Then I spit and got caught. End quote. A lot of that, I think, was lost in translation because he's talking about one of his victims, the Koryagin, and then he's saying something about leaving the police office. Oh, I guess maybe he's thinking that he's supposed to be set up or something, but yet he remained free. I don't know. I guess I don't understand that part. Anyways, I was laughing when I said rubles because it gave me a flashback. Remember how I struggled to say it in, I think it was episode 3 when I covered Lithuania's first known serial killer? I never thought I'd have to fucking say the word rubles or rubles again. But in case you didn't listen to that episode or you don't know, rubles or whatever it is currency. So you're fucking welcome again. Anyways, we move on. When it comes to forgiveness, Alexander said, quote, "No, I do not regret it. So much strength and time spent. Repent? I do not repent. This is again a dull formality. It will not change my sentence. Since I was young, I dreamed. Everything was different back then, and it all turned out the way I wanted it to. I knew that they had me nailed when they started pressing me about 12 victims, but surprised that I actually killed 60. I watched a show about me on TV. Dennis, my classmate, told the camera, when they learned that I committed the crimes, it was a shock. Others said I was a rare case, killing just for the sake of killing. There's no motivation, neither race, nor sex, nor religion." Erase that. Even someone wrote, "Pichushkin himself doesn't know yet that the history of criminology is changed, that it didn't account for someone such as him, and that he will go down in history forever." End quote. When asked about sports, Alexander said, quote, "I have never watched football. No football, no hockey." End quote. When asked about travel, he states, quote, "I would like to live in Mexico. First, it's warm there, and secondly, there are forests. Maybe there I could live in a different way if I was there." End quote. After the reporter told Alexander that Mexico doesn't have forests, this guy replies, quote, "Do you want me to tell you there are no jungles? Like Freddy Krueger said, Elm Street exists in every city." End quote. What the fuck? What in the actual fuck? Anyway, Alexander also stated, quote, "The notions of good and evil are relative things." End quote. He once said that his victims were, quote, "nothing but pawns." End quote. And in his world, every pawn had a purpose, which was to move, to fall, and to prove his power. What this guy failed to realize is, even in a chess game, every player eventually faces their endgame. Alexander's didn't come from his brilliance. It came from his arrogance. He got fucking full of himself, and grandiosity killed the cat. His game came to an end with a simple letter left by a woman who trusted him, letting her son know where she was going. Moscow City prosecutor Yuri Siomin says, quote, "Justice has been done. The culprit has been held accountable." End quote. Judge Vladimir Yusov says Alexander is fully aware of his actions, but he does have to undergo psychiatric treatment for a personality disorder expressed in a sadistic inclination toward murder. End quote. Tatiana Vlasova is one of the victim's mothers, and as she held up a photo of her son Vladimir, she said, quote, "He should have been treated as an exceptional case and given a death sentence." End quote. But Russia has a moratorium, don't know if I said that right, on capital punishment, meaning it isn't completely done away with, but it does pause the carrying out of death sentences in order to allow review of the case. During this time, people can be sentenced to death, but they won't actually be executed. To date, Alexander Pichushkin sits inside the Polar Owl Prison, which is a maximum security facility in a remote area located in the Arctic Circle in Russia's far north, known for its extremely harsh and isolated conditions, and he deserves it. He spends most of every hour alone. For 1 hour a day, he's allowed into a small caged yard for exercise, but he never sees other inmates. Today, Bitsevsky Park is a peaceful place again, where kids play near the trees and families stroll along the paths. And that, my grave digging friends, is the story of Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer. You know what time it is. Debrief and discuss. I have no doubt he was a serial killer. But part of me thinks he just wanted to be the quote unquote best and have the highest victim count. He was clearly in competition with that other guy, the butcher of Rostov or whatever it was. And could that be why he asked the court to add 11 victims to his body count? Could he have made up some of his victims and just marked spots on the chessboard, making it seem like he killed more people than he actually did? I don't know. And then he's like, he walked through the scene and remembered every single detail, but then later on he's like, oh, I don't care enough. Like he's just so high and mighty that he doesn't care enough to remember the people or the places or all of the specific details, you know? I don't know. So I almost fucking forgot. So when he was saying that he likes the sound of a skull cracking or skull crushing or whatever it was, I always want to get inside the mind of these people that we talk about. Like, why do they get excited over certain things? Because I don't understand it. So my ass looked up on YouTube the sound of a skull cracking. And I guess I went into it without any expectations. I obviously knew I wasn't going to necessarily like it, but I can't really describe how it sounds. Like, it's not something that made me cringe, but it's also not something that I enjoyed. So I cannot relate to this dude. Don't judge me. I just consider it a part of research, okay? But yeah, I looked it up and it's I don't know, it kind of just sounds like bones cracking. So, but I also wondered, would it sound different because when he was doing it, there was actually a brain in the head? You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? Is my mathing for y'all? I don't know. I was just curious to see why the hell he was so excited to hear that sound, and it did nothing for me. Maybe because I'm not a fucking serial killer. So there's that. Anyway, there is an episode of Killers, Criminals, and Mobsters on Apple TV that covers this guy. I believe it's season 1, episode 12. I haven't seen it because I don't have Apple TV. I am not an Apple person, and I'm not going to get Apple. So if I can find it somewhere else, then I'll watch it. Anyways, as always, send me more suggestions. These are good stories that I've never heard of. They are getting added to my long ass list of topics to cover. So keep them coming. You can DM me on IG, X, TikTok. The handle is at the number 8 FTUNDER_GS85. Facebook is 8 Feet Under with Granny Smith, all spelled out. Until next time, stay curious, but stay safe. And remember, an apple a day keeps the motherfucking murderers away. Bye.